All right, let's jump right in. For centuries, if you've been following this, you know that historians and theologians have been looking at two major prophetic calendars from the ancient world. And for the longest time, everyone thought they were totally separate, maybe even competing with each other. But what if they're not? What if they're actually two sides of the very same coin, pointing to a single, specific window in time? A window, it turns out, we might be living in right now.
So this is the big puzzle we're going to try and piece together today. We're going to put on our ancient historian hats for this one and dig into two really key frameworks. First, the Talmudic system of 3 ages, and second, the idea of 120 Jubilee cycles that we find in the Dead Sea Scrolls. The real question is, do these ancient timelines actually line up? And if they do, what time are they pointing to?
So our first clue comes from a really foundational concept in ancient rabbinic thought. Long before modern historians started carving up time into the Iron Age or the Renaissance, these ancient scholars saw all of human history as this grand 3-act play. Now, what's so interesting here is where this comes from. This isn't some fringe theory from the Middle Ages. This quote is from the Talmud, and it reflects a Jewish understanding that was in place even before the time of Christ. The idea was simple. History had a blueprint, a 6,000-year timeline, and it was neatly divided into 3 distinct ages, each lasting 2,000 years.
And this lays it out perfectly. Each age is defined by a huge pivotal event. The first age, they called it an age of chaos or tohu. That ends with God's covenant with Abraham, and that single event kicks off the second age, the age of Torah, or the law. Then, the arrival of the Messiah, specifically his ministry, which we can date to around 27 to 33 AD, that marks the beginning of the third and final 2,000-year age.
But here's where the real detective work has to start. Because you see, to make any of this work, you need a solid, reliable start date. And if you've ever tried to study ancient texts, you know that's the #1 challenge, because the primary sources, well, they don't always agree with each other.
And this is the critical point. We have these two major manuscript traditions. On one hand, you've got the Masoretic text. It's the basis for most of our modern Bibles, and its timeline gives us a creation date around 4004 BC. But then you have the Septuagint. That's the Greek translation that Jesus and the apostles actually used and quoted from. Its genealogies are way longer, and it pushes creation all the way back to around 5500 BC. I mean, that's not a small typo. That's a 1,500-year difference. It completely changes how you calculate that 6,000-year clock.
So how do serious researchers handle a problem like this? Well, the goal isn't really to prove one text is right and the other is wrong. The smarter approach is to look for what you might call a convergence zone, a period of time where different calendar systems, even with their totally different starting points, all seem to be pointing. It's about finding a consistent signal in all that ancient noise.
Okay, so keeping that big chronology problem in mind, let's turn to our second major piece of evidence. Hidden away in the Dead Sea Scrolls, there is another equally sophisticated system for mapping out history, the Jubilee calendar.
Now, for anyone who's not familiar, the Jubilee is this really fascinating Israelite concept from the book of Leviticus. Think of it as a grand cycle of time, almost like a societal reset button. It was meant to happen at the end of every 7 weeks of years, and when it did, all debts were supposed to be canceled and land was returned. It was a huge deal.
But just like the creation date, there's a big debate here too. Is a Jubilee cycle 49 years long, or is it 50? The Book of Jubilees from the Dead Sea Scrolls seems to hint at 49, while a plain reading of Leviticus points to 50. Now you might think, what's 1 year? Well, when you stretch that out over 120 cycles of history, that 1-year difference creates a 120-year gap in your final calculation. So it matters a lot.
Well, the scholarly consensus is that this isn't really a contradiction at all. It's a feature of ancient timekeeping. The most likely answer is that they used a dual counting system. The 50th year, that great year of release, was also counted as the very first year of the next 49-year cycle. So both the 49 and 50-year counts are technically correct. They're just different ways of looking at the same thing.
Okay, so we have the 3 ages system, and we have the 120 Jubilee system. And on the surface, they seem really complex and totally independent. But this is the point where it all starts to click together, in a way that is, frankly, pretty startling.
So we have to ask the question, right? Are we looking at 2 completely different clocks, built by different people, that just happen to look kind of similar? Or is this actually the same clock, just with one phase that measures in hours and another that measures in minutes?
And here it is. This is the core reveal. That 2,000-year block of time that the Talmudic rabbis were using, it wasn't just some nice round number they pulled out of thin air. It is a direct product of the Jubilee system itself. One 2,000-year age is exactly 40 Jubilee cycles.
The math is just so simple, it's profound. You take 40 Jubilee cycles and you use that 50-year count, and what do you get? Exactly 2,000 years. This means the Three Ages system isn't a separate calendar at all. It's just the Jubilee calendar expressed in bigger units. They're structurally the exact same thing.
So, here's the bottom line. If they're the same system, they have to have the same endpoint. It's simple logic. 3 ages of 40 Jubilees each gives you 120 total Jubilees for all of history. And if you anchor the start of that final 2,000-year block to the ministry of the Messiah, somewhere around 27 to 33 AD, the math lands you smack in the middle of a target window of 2027 to 2033.
Okay, so the mathematical convergence is one thing, and it's absolutely fascinating. But the ancient texts didn't just give us a when. They also gave us a what. They left behind a pretty detailed description of the social and moral conditions they expected to see in that final transition period.
I mean, just look at this quote. It comes from the exact same passage in the Talmud. It paints this picture of a total societal breakdown, conflict between generations, a loss of respect for truth and wisdom, a world where the young have no respect for their elders. Now, from a historian's perspective, the goal isn't to say, hey, this is happening right now. But you can't help but notice the striking parallels between these ancient descriptions and so many modern sociological observations.
And the list just keeps going. You know, for the ancient communities that wrote and preserved these texts, like the one at Qumran where they found the Dead Sea Scrolls, these weren't just abstract ideas. These were imminent signs that they were actively watching for because they believed they were living in the final generation of an age. They described a time of incredible upheaval, socially, economically, militarily, and they saw it all as a precursor to some great world-changing shift.
Now, it's really important to clarify the intent here. This kind of analysis always gets criticized as date setting, but the texts themselves draw a pretty clear line. While they absolutely say that no one knows the day or the hour, they also explicitly tell observers to read the signs and to know the season. So this is an exercise in understanding this season, not trying to pinpoint a specific day on the calendar.
And this is where we pull it all together. You can see the final convergence. You've got the Three Ages system, the 120 Jubilees, the apocalypse of weeks from the book of Enoch, and even certain interpretations of Daniel's famous prophecy when you look at it through a Jubilee lens. What's so remarkable isn't that one of these systems points to our time, it's that multiple, independent, ancient systems all seem to cluster around the same, very narrow window. The signal, you could say, is incredibly consistent.
Which of course leaves us with one last, pretty provocative question. This isn't about prediction, it's about reflection. If these ancient calendar makers and historians were even close to being correct in their calculations, if these systems that they laid down thousands of years ago are in fact culminating right now, what does it mean for us to be alive in what they identified as possibly the most significant transition point in all of human history? That is something worth thinking about.